My parents handed my brother a cool $120,000 for a Manhattan home, looking me dead in the eye and calling me a failure because I worked with my hands. I walked out that door and cut off all contact. 2 years of absolute silence went by. Then, yesterday afternoon, my brother Wyatt drove his shiny new Porsche past my 5-acre property. He slammed on the brakes, stared at the massive custom mansion and the commercial workshop I had built from the ground up, and immediately called our dad, screaming into the phone, "Dad, you need to see what Elijah has built. It is unbelievable." Little did they know, their entire world of fake wealth and arrogance was about to crash down around them in the most humiliating way possible. Thank you for being here. Grab a warm glass of water, sit down, and listen to me tell the whole story. I was standing inside my climate-controlled workshop, holding a cup of black coffee, watching the security camera feed on my monitor. The gravel driveway crunched loudly under the tires of Wyatt's black Porsche 911. The car stopped dead right in front of the main automated gate. Through the high-definition lens, I could see Wyatt stepping out of the driver's seat. He was wearing a tailored suit that probably cost more than my first truck. But his face completely lost its color. He gripped the wrought iron gate, his eyes darting from the 3-story modern craftsman home with its soaring glass windows to the massive timber-framed workshop bearing the glowing sign, Elijah's Custom Construction. I saw him pull his phone out with trembling hands. I stepped out of the side door of the shop, staying out of his line of sight, just close enough to hear his voice carrying over the quiet country breeze. He was completely frantic. He paced back and forth, dragging a hand through his perfectly styled hair. He was shouting into the receiver, "Dad, I am not exaggerating. I took a wrong turn heading to a client meeting and I am standing outside Elijah's place. You need to see what he built. It is an absolute fortress. It is easily a multi-million-dollar estate. No, Dad, listen to me. We made a massive mistake." A cold, hard smile crept across my face. 2 years ago, they threw me away like garbage. 2 years ago, my father stood in his formal dining room and told me my life was a waste. They thought I would crawl back to them, begging for a scrap of their approval. They thought my construction business would bankrupt me. Watching Wyatt sweat through his expensive shirt, staring at the physical proof of my success, I felt a deep, satisfying warmth in my chest. But I did not go out to greet him. Not yet. I turned around and walked back inside the shop, the smell of fresh-cut cedar filling my lungs. I ran my hand over a massive slab of reclaimed oak I was preparing for a client. To understand exactly how sweet this moment felt, you have to understand the nightmare I grew up in. You have to understand what it means to be the invisible son. Growing up in a pristine, middle-class suburb of Pittsburgh, appearance was the only currency that mattered. My father, Robert, was a senior bank manager. My mother, Eleanor, was a high-end real estate agent. Their entire existence revolved around what the neighbors thought, what kind of car sat in the driveway, and how perfectly manicured our front lawn was. And in their perfect little world, there was a clear hierarchy. My brother Wyatt was the golden child. He was 3 years younger than me, but you would think he was the king of the house. Wyatt was naturally gifted at academics. He could ace a calculus exam without opening a textbook. He joined the debate team, the chess club, and played varsity tennis. He was exactly the kind of son my parents could brag about at their weekly country club dinners. Then there was me. I was the problem child. I was not a bad kid. I never got into fights and I never got arrested. But I struggled in school. I would study until my eyes blurred, only to pull off average grades. My brain just did not work with abstract numbers and theories. But put a broken lawnmower in front of me, and I could strip the engine down and rebuild it blindfolded by the time I was 12. I had a natural, intuitive understanding of mechanics and structures. My hands knew how to create things. But in my house, working with your hands was viewed as a disease. Sunday dinners were a battleground. My Uncle Thomas would often join us. Thomas was a bitter corporate lawyer, fresh off a nasty divorce, and he loved taking his misery out on me. He would swirl his expensive bourbon, look at me across the table, and smirk. "So, Elijah, are you planning to be a janitor or a ditch digger?" Because with those math scores, you better get used to wearing a name tag. My parents never defended me. My father would just sigh and shake his head, while my mother would quickly change the subject to Wyatt's latest academic award. When I was 14, I spent my entire summer vacation building a treehouse in the backyard. I did not just nail a few boards to a branch. I scavenged high-quality lumber from local construction sites. I built a legitimate two-story structure with a weatherproof roof, functional windows, and a reinforced deck. The neighbors were amazed. The old retired architect down the street even came over to shake my hand and compliment my load-bearing design. I was so proud. I thought, finally, my parents will see what I am capable of. When I finished, I ran inside and asked my father to come look. He stepped onto the back porch, checking his gold watch. He looked at the treehouse for exactly 10 seconds. He did not smile. He did not walk closer. He just crossed his arms and frowned. Well, I hope you are done playing with wood now. Summer is almost over, and your grades are slipping. You need to focus on things that actually matter. He turned around and walked back inside. The rejection hit me like a physical punch to the gut. I stood there alone in the yard, realizing that in their eyes, my talent was nothing more than a shameful hobby. The divide between Wyatt and me became permanent during our high school graduations. When Wyatt graduated, he was accepted into a prestigious Ivy League university to study finance. My parents treated it like a national holiday. They rented out the private room of the most expensive steakhouse in the city. Family members flew in from out of state. My father gave a glowing 20-minute speech, raising his glass and declaring that Wyatt was destined to rule Wall Street. Then, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a set of keys. He handed them to Wyatt. It was a brand new, luxury sedan. "You will need reliable transportation for your internships," my father announced proudly. My graduation 3 years earlier was a completely different story. I had applied and been accepted into a highly respected technical college for construction management. When I told my parents, my mother looked at me like I had just confessed to a crime. "We did not raise our son to work with his hands," she snapped, smoothing her silk blouse. "Construction is for people who have no other options." We celebrated my graduation at a cheap chain restaurant on a Tuesday night. My gift was a refurbished laptop that my father got from his bank's IT department. There was no speech. There was no party. Worse than the lack of celebration was the financial reality. I quickly learned that the college fund my parents had supposedly been saving for both of us was being diverted entirely to Wyatt. Every single penny went to cover Wyatt's Ivy League tuition, his expensive dorm room, and his fraternity fees. I was left to fend for myself. I spent the next 2 years working grueling night shifts at a lumber yard, hauling heavy materials just to pay my own tuition at the trade school. I would show up to my classes exhausted, my hands covered in calluses and splinters, while Wyatt was posting photos on social media from ski trips in Aspen, funded by my parents. But I refused to quit. I graduated at the top of my class in construction management. My parents did not even attend my graduation ceremony. They claimed they had to be in New York to help Wyatt move into his new luxury apartment for a summer internship. I sat in the auditorium alone, gripping my diploma, making a silent vow that I would build an empire so big they could never ignore me again. The only good thing to come out of those dark, early years was Sarah. I met her when I was working as a junior project manager for a local contracting firm. She was a registered nurse, working grueling 12-hour shifts at the county hospital. Sarah was tough, brilliant, and fiercely loyal. She understood the value of hard work because she lived it every single day. She did not care that my boots were covered in mud or that I drove a beat-up Ford truck. She saw my ambition. She saw my heart. We fell in love fast. For the first time in my life, I had someone in my corner who actually believed in me. When I got my first major promotion to senior project manager, the fastest promotion in my firm's history, Sarah surprised me with a homemade dinner and a cake. She looked me in the eyes and told me how incredibly proud she was of my work ethic. I made the mistake of bringing Sarah to my parents' house for a holiday dinner. I thought, with my new title and a higher salary, maybe my father would finally show a shred of respect. I was dead wrong. The entire evening was a sickening display of favoritism. Wyatt was home for the holidays, talking endlessly about his new junior analyst position at a major financial firm. My father leaned forward, hanging on his every word. My mother practically glowed, asking Wyatt about his corporate dinners and the wealthy clients he was meeting. We sat there in silence for an hour. Finally, Sarah, who never let anyone disrespect me, politely cleared her throat. "Elijah just received a massive promotion," she said, her voice clear and firm. "He is now overseeing multi-million-dollar commercial builds. The firm is incredibly lucky to have him." The room went dead silent. My mother paused with her wine glass halfway to her mouth. My father gave a tight, dismissive little smile. "Well, someone has to manage the laborers," he said dryly. Then he immediately turned his body back toward Wyatt. "Now, Wyatt, tell me more about that hedge fund manager you met last week." I felt the blood rush to my face. I looked down at my plate, the familiar sting of worthlessness washing over me. But Sarah did not look down. I felt her hand grip my knee under the table. Her jaw was clenched tight, a vein pulsing slightly on her neck. She threw her napkin onto the table, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet dining room. "We are leaving," Sarah announced. She stood up, her chair scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. My mother looked shocked. "Excuse me? We have not even served dessert. I am not sitting here and watching you treat the hardest working man I know like a second-class citizen." Sarah fired back, her eyes blazing. "You two have absolutely no idea what kind of man you raised. Let's go, Elijah." I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. I followed Sarah out the front door into the freezing winter night. As soon as we got into my truck, the heat blasting, Sarah reached over and grabbed my face in her hands. "You are not them," she said fiercely. "You are building real things. They are just managing fake numbers. Never let them make you feel small again." That night, sitting in the cold cab of my truck, I knew I was going to marry her. Sarah gave me the courage to take the biggest risk of my life. The following spring, we got married in a tiny, inexpensive ceremony at a local park. Right after the wedding, I quit my safe job at the contracting firm. I emptied my small savings account, maxed out a credit card, and launched Elijah's Custom Construction. The beginning was pure hell. I had no financial backing, no safety net, and no reputation. It was just me and James, a brilliant but older carpenter I had met at a job site. James believed in my vision. We rented a tiny, freezing storage unit to keep our tools and operated the business out of the front seat of my truck. Sarah and I moved into a cramped, one-bedroom apartment in a rough neighborhood just to keep our overhead low. We ate canned beans and generic pasta for dinner almost every night. I was working 16-hour days, bidding on jobs during the day and doing physical demolition work at night. My hands were constantly bleeding and cracked. My back ached so badly some mornings I could barely get out of bed. I invited my parents over to see our new apartment once. My mother answered the phone, listened to my invitation, and scoffed. "Elijah, that neighborhood is simply not safe. It is not really our scene. Why don't you and Sarah just drive to our house instead?" She refused to set foot in my home because it did not meet her ridiculous standards of wealth. They never once asked how my business was doing. They never offered a dime of help. But James and I kept grinding. We took the absolute worst jobs, the ones no other contractors wanted to touch. We fixed leaky roofs in the freezing rain. We crawled under rotted foundations in the mud. And we did every single job with absolute perfection. Slowly, word started to spread. People realized that if you hired Elijah's Custom Construction, the job was done right, on time, and built to last. Our first break came when we secured a contract to remodel a small, outdated kitchen for an elderly couple. We poured our souls into that kitchen. James and I custom-built the cabinets by hand. When the couple saw the finished product, the wife actually cried. She recommended us to her daughter, who recommended us to a real estate investor. The wheel finally started turning. Just as I felt I could finally take a deep breath, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice sounded overly sweet, which always meant trouble. Elijah, darling, your father and I are hosting a special family dinner this Friday. We have a major announcement to make, and it is mandatory you both attend. I thought, foolishly, that maybe they had heard about my new business gaining traction. Maybe this was the moment they finally acknowledged my hard work. I told Sarah we should go. I had no idea I was walking straight into an ambush. Friday night arrived. Sarah and I dressed up and drove to my parents' immaculate suburban house. Wyatt was already there, sipping a craft beer and looking incredibly smug. The dining room table was set with fine china and silver. My father was pouring an expensive bottle of red wine. The atmosphere felt strangely celebratory. We sat down and the pleasantries were brief. As soon as the main course was served, my father tapped his knife against his wine glass. He stood up, beaming with pride, placing a heavy hand on Wyatt's shoulder. Eleanor and I have some fantastic news, my father announced, his voice booming. As you all know, Wyatt has been doing exceptionally well at the firm in New York. However, renting an apartment is just throwing money away. A man of his stature needs a permanent asset. Therefore, your mother and I have decided to gift Wyatt a down payment for a luxury condo in Manhattan. We have transferred $120,000 into his account today. The air in the room instantly vanished. I stopped breathing. I stared at my father, waiting for the punchline. $120,000. It was a fortune. It was more money than my entire company had made in revenue that year. Wyatt grinned, raising his glass. Thanks, Dad. It is a prime location. Great for networking. Sarah dropped her fork, clattered loudly against her plate. She looked directly at my father, her eyes narrowing. That is incredibly generous, Robert. Since you are giving out real estate investments, I assume you are also helping Elijah? His construction business is expanding, and we are desperately trying to secure a commercial loan for equipment and a small plot of land. Even a fraction of that money would change our lives right now. My father slowly set his wine glass down. The fake smile vanished from his face, replaced by a look of utter contempt. He looked at me, not Sarah. Help Elijah? My father said, his voice dripping with disgust. Why would we reward failure? The word hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Failure. Sarah stood up immediately. Excuse me? My father ignored her, keeping his cold eyes locked on mine. You chose to reject a proper education. You chose to start some little handyman hustle instead of getting a real corporate job. Wyatt followed our guidance. He made something of himself. You chose to work with your hands rather than your mind. You made your bed, Elijah. Now you get to lie in it. I felt a blinding heat rush to my face. My fists clenched under the table so hard my knuckles turned white. All the years of trying to please them, all the long nights studying blueprints, all the physical pain and exhaustion I endured to build something honest. It meant absolutely nothing. To my own father, I was just a dirty laborer. I was a failure. I stood up. I did not yell. I did not throw anything. My voice was dangerously calm, hollowed out by pure betrayal. Keep your money, I said, and keep your golden child. I took Sarah's hand and walked out the front door. I did not look back. The drive home was dead silent. I gripped the steering wheel so tight my hands cramped. The rage burning inside me was entirely new. It was not the childhood disappointment anymore. It was the cold, hard realization that these people would gladly watch me drown while buying my brother a luxury yacht. The next morning, I received a text from my mother asking me to meet her at a local coffee shop. A small, stupid part of me thought she was going to apologize for my father's cruel behavior. I agreed to meet her. I walked into the cafe and found her sitting at a corner table, elegantly dressed, sipping a vanilla latte. I sat down across from her. I looked at her directly and laid it all out. I told her how deeply my father's words had cut me. I told her about the struggles Sarah and I were facing, working ourselves to the bone just to keep the lights on, while they handed Wyatt a small fortune. My mother listened, her expression completely blank. When I finished, she carefully set her coffee cup down and sighed, as if I were a toddler throwing a tantrum. "Elijah, you have always been far too sensitive," she said smoothly. "Your father was simply being honest. You cannot expect us to fund your little lifestyle choices. Wyatt is in a prestigious field. He needs to maintain a certain image for his clients. The money is an investment in a guaranteed return. Throwing money at a struggling blue-collar business is just risky." I stared at her. The woman who gave birth to me was sitting there, calculating my worth like a bad stock option. "You think my life is a bad investment?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "I think you chose the wrong path," she replied without hesitating. "And you cannot blame us for your current financial difficulties." I nodded slowly. The last remaining string tying me to my family snapped. The illusion was gone. I stood up from the table. "You will never see me again," I said. "Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my apartment. If you ever want a relationship with me, it will be on my terms, and it will only happen when you realize the massive mistake you have made. Until then, you are dead to me." I walked out of the coffee shop, pulled out my phone, and blocked both of my parents' numbers. I blocked Wyatt. I erased them from my life completely. I went back to the job site, picked up a sledgehammer, and spent the next 3 hours destroying a concrete wall, channeling every ounce of grief and fury into the heavy swings. From that day on, I was a ghost to my family, and I was ready to go to war with the world. Cutting out my toxic family was supposed to bring me peace. Instead, it brought the darkest chapter of my professional life. About a month after the explosive dinner, my company hit a massive wall. We had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive bid for a major commercial renovation project downtown. Winning this contract would secure our company's future for the next 2 years. It was the lifeline we desperately needed. I had poured hundreds of unpaid hours into the blueprints, detailing innovative structural solutions that would save the client thousands in material costs. I kept the blueprints locked in the site office. Only 2 people had the keys, me and Julian. Julian was a master carpenter I had hired 6 months prior. He came to me desperate, dealing with a messy custody battle over his kids and facing eviction. I felt sorry for him. I gave him an advance on his paycheck, bought him new tools, and treated him like a brother. I trusted him implicitly. The morning the bids were due, I walked into the site office. The filing cabinet was wide open. The master folders containing the blueprints and my entire pricing strategy were gone. Panic seized my chest. I called Julian frantically. It went straight to voicemail. I drove to his apartment. It was empty. The realization hit me like a bucket of ice water. Later that afternoon, I found out the truth. The contract was awarded to Carter Construction, my biggest rival. Carter was a sleazy contractor known for cutting corners and poaching talent. I found out from a supplier that Julian had walked into Carter's office the night before, handed over my complete proprietary blueprints and pricing model, and was immediately hired by Carter with a hefty signing bonus. Julian sold me out to pay his legal fees. I was destroyed. I stood in my empty office, staring at the blank desk. I had no money to hire a lawyer. A lawsuit for intellectual property theft would take years and bankrupt me in legal fees anyway. Without that major contract, the company was bleeding cash. We could not make the next payroll. We were facing total bankruptcy. I went home that night and collapsed on the cheap sofa in our apartment. I buried my face in my hands and finally broke down. My parents were right. I was a failure. I was going to lose everything. Sarah sat down next to me. She did not offer empty platitudes. She grabbed my shoulders and pulled my head up. "You listen to me," she said fiercely. "Julian is a coward. Carter is a thief. But they do not have what you have in your head and in your hands. You built this from nothing. We will survive this. Do not give your father the satisfaction of being right." She was right. I refused to die like this. The next morning, I woke up at 4 a.m. I loaded my truck, drove to the lumber yard, and started knocking on doors, taking every miserable, small-time repair job I could find just to keep the lights on. I was a wounded animal fighting for survival. I did not know it then, but a massive stroke of luck was about to change my destiny forever. A week later, I was doing a small framing job on a residential porch. The homeowner had hired an independent building inspector to review the city permits. The inspector pulled up in a battered old Ford truck. An older man stepped out, wearing a faded flannel shirt and work boots. It was Charles. Anyone in the local industry knew who Charles was. He was a legendary retired contractor. He had built half the luxury estates in the county before selling his massive firm and semi-retiring to do high-level consulting and inspections. Charles was a titan, a man who commanded absolute respect. Charles walked onto the porch, carrying a clipboard. He ignored the homeowner and walked straight up to the exposed framing I was working on. He stood there for a long time, running his calloused hand over the complex joints I had cut. He looked at the bracing. He looked at the precise measurements. "Who cut these joints?" Charles asked, his voice rough like sandpaper. "I did, sir," I replied, wiping the sweat from my forehead. Charles turned around and looked at me. He had piercing blue eyes that seemed to scan my soul. "You do not use standard metal brackets here. You mortised the beams. Nobody does that anymore. Takes too much time." "Why did you do it?" "Because metal brackets rust in this climate," I said firmly. "Wood joints, cut right, will outlast the foundation. I do not build garbage." Charles stared at me for a few seconds. A slow smile spread across his weathered face. "Come with me to my truck, son. We need to talk." Sitting on the tailgate of his truck, I told Charles everything. I told him about my business, my work ethic, and eventually the theft of my blueprints by Julian and Carter. When I mentioned Carter's name, Charles's jaw tightened. "Carter is a snake," Charles spat. "He has been doing shoddy work for a decade. He does not know a load-bearing wall from a picket fence." Charles pulled a thick file out of his truck cab. "I have a client," Charles said. "Dr. Matthew. He is the chief of surgery at the Central Hospital. He bought a massive historic property downtown. He wants a complete, top-to-bottom luxury renovation. Carter bid on the job, but I am Matthew's advisor, and I told him to reject it. I need a master craftsman to run this site. I need someone who gives a damn about the wood. I am giving you the contract." I almost fell off the tailgate. It was a multi-million-dollar renovation. The profit margin alone would secure my company for the next 5 years. "Charles, I do not have the crew size for a job this big right now." "I am co-signing your equipment loans," Charles said fiercely. "And I am sending my best retired guys to help you lead the crews. I see who you are, Elijah. You are a builder. Let's go bury Carter." That moment changed my life. Charles became the father figure I never had. He mentored me, opened doors to the elite social circles, and transferred his legendary reputation directly to my company. We took Dr. Matthew's project and executed it flawlessly. The finished renovation was so spectacular, it was featured in a regional architectural magazine. The phone started ringing off the hook. Elijah's custom construction exploded overnight. We were not just surviving anymore, we were dominating the market. With the massive profits from Dr. Matthew's renovation and a growing list of elite clients, I finally had real capital. But instead of buying a flashy sports car or a luxury condo like my brother, I made a calculated investment. I found a 5-acre parcel of land just outside the city limits. It was heavily wooded, beautiful, but notoriously difficult to develop because of a steep access incline. The bank was practically giving it away. I bought it in cash. For the next year, every weekend and every evening after running the company, I was on that land. James, my loyal foreman, and Charles would come out with a cooler of beer, and we would clear trees with chainsaws. I rented a bulldozer and cut the access road myself. Sarah would bring us sandwiches and help clear brush. We were exhausted, our muscles screaming every night, but it was the purest joy I had ever felt. We were building our own sanctuary. I designed the main house myself. It was a 3-story, modern craftsman masterpiece. Exposed timber beams, massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley, and custom stone masonry. Everything was built with extreme precision. Next to the house, I built a massive, commercial-grade workshop and a luxury showroom for my clients. As the estate rose from the dirt, My company grew to over 40 employees. We bought out smaller competitors. We secured government contracts. My net worth skyrocketed past anything my father or brother could have ever imagined. Yet I stayed completely off the radar. I did not post on social media. I drove a heavy-duty work truck. My parents and my brother still thought I was rotting away in a cheap apartment, struggling to fix toilets. Then the national recognition hit. A prestigious architectural magazine, distributed across the country, sent a team to photograph our completed 5-acre estate. They ran an 8-page cover story highlighting the craftsmanship, the innovative design, and the story of the self-made contractor who built an empire with his own 2 hands. The magazine hit the newsstands on a Tuesday. I knew it was only a matter of time before the shockwaves hit my family. I just did not realize the first casualty would be the golden child himself. This brings us right back to yesterday afternoon, where I was watching Wyatt panic outside my gates. After letting him sweat by his Porsche for 10 minutes, I finally hit the remote button to open the heavy iron gates. Wyatt drove up the long, winding driveway. I walked out of the shop to meet him. As he stepped out of the car, I expected the usual arrogance. I expected him to make some snide comment. Instead, he looked entirely broken. The tailored suit was wrinkled. He had dark, heavy bags under his eyes. He looked around the pristine estate, the manicured lawns, the massive showroom, and then looked at me. His voice trembled. You built this?" Wyatt asked, his voice cracking. "Every inch of it," I said flatly. "What do you want, Wyatt?" To my absolute shock, Wyatt did not boast. He did not flex his Wall Street muscles. His shoulders slumped, and he covered his face with his hands. Right there in my driveway, the golden child shattered into a million pieces. "I am drowning, Elijah," he whispered. I led him inside the shop, poured him a glass of water, and listened as the perfect illusion of his life unraveled. The $120,000 down payment our parents gave him? It barely covered the minimum requirement for a Manhattan condo he could not afford. His massive salary was eaten entirely by exorbitant taxes, astronomical HOA fees, and the crushing pressure to maintain the wealthy lifestyle his firm demanded. He was drowning in credit card debt. His fiancée had left him a month ago, disgusted by his constant anxiety. And the darkest secret of all, to keep up the 80-hour work weeks, Wyatt confessed he was heavily addicted to prescription anxiety medication and stimulants. "I have nothing," Wyatt said, tears welling in his eyes. "I just move fake numbers on a screen to make rich people richer. I have no skills. I have no real friends. Dad calls me every week demanding updates on my promotions so he can brag to his golf buddies. The pressure is killing me. I saw the magazine article about your company. I saw the pictures of this house. I drove out here hoping it was a mistake. But you built a real life. I am a complete fraud." I looked at the brother I had hated for years. I expected to feel triumph. I expected to laugh in his face. But sitting across from me was not an arrogant Wall Street shark. It was a terrified, exhausted victim of our parents' toxic parenting. They had destroyed him with their conditional love. I took a deep breath. The anger washed away, replaced by a strange, calm authority. "You are good with numbers, Wyatt," I said slowly. "My business has scaled too fast. I need a ruthless chief financial officer I can trust to handle the corporate accounts. Sell the Porsche. Sell the Manhattan condo at a loss if you have to. Go to rehab. And when you are clean, you can come work for the brother you thought was a failure." Wyatt stared at me, completely stunned. He broke down sobbing, burying his head in his hands. He agreed to everything. Wyatt left my estate a changed man, heading straight to a residential treatment center we found together. He promised to keep my offer a secret from our parents. I wanted to deal with them myself. I did not have to wait long. 2 days after the magazine hit the stands, my cell phone vibrated on my desk. It was an unknown number, but I recognized the area code. I answered it. "Elijah, it is your mother." It had been over 2 years since I last heard that sharp, aristocratic voice. She sounded different, though. There was a forced, sugary sweetness to her tone that immediately set off alarm bells in my head. "What do you want, Eleanor?" I asked coldly. "Oh, darling, please do not use that tone. We saw the incredible article in the magazine. Your father and I are just, well, we are absolutely overwhelmed with pride. We always knew you had a knack for building little things." I rolled my eyes. "Get to the point." She cleared her throat. "Well, the article mentioned that your firm is hosting an exclusive luxury showcase next weekend at the new mountain estate you finished. Your father and I would absolutely love to attend. We want to celebrate your success and, reconnect. Family is everything, after all. Family is everything." I almost laughed out loud. When I was starving in a one-bedroom apartment, family was nowhere to be found. Now that I had a multimillion-dollar business on the cover of a magazine, suddenly they wanted front-row seats. I knew exactly what they were doing. They saw the wealth. They saw the elite client list. They wanted to show up at my event, rub elbows with the local billionaires, and take credit for my success. They wanted to tell their country club friends, "That is our son. We supported him all along." But there was another piece to the puzzle. Earlier that morning, while organizing Wyatt's chaotic financial files to prepare for his eventual role as CFO, my eyes had caught a terrifying detail hidden in his bank statements. A detail involving our parents. A detail so dark and humiliating, it explained exactly why my mother was suddenly desperate to crawl back into my life. I smiled, a cold, calculated smile. The trap was set. "Of course, Mother," I said smoothly into the phone. "I would be honored to have you and Dad at the showcase. I will put you on the VIP list. Dress nicely. There will be a lot of important people there." "Oh, wonderful," she gushed. "We will see you there, sweetie." I hung up the phone and looked out the window of my massive office. They thought they were coming to an elegant party to exploit my success. They had no idea they were walking directly into an execution. The stage was set, the audience was primed, and I held the ultimate card that was going to destroy their arrogant facade forever. The weekend of the luxury showcase arrived. The event was held at a brand new $4 million mountain estate my company had just finished building. The property was a masterpiece. It sat on a ridge overlooking a stunning valley, featuring imported stone, massive exposed timber beams, and walls of structural glass. I hired a high-end catering company, a string quartet, and valets. The driveway was packed with Mercedes, BMWs, and Range Rovers belonging to the city's elite. Mayors, hospital directors, and prominent real estate investors were all there, admiring the craftsmanship. I stood near the massive stone fireplace in the great room, holding a glass of sparkling water. Sarah was standing next to me, wearing a simple but elegant black dress. She looked absolutely beautiful. Charles was over by the custom kitchen island, laughing and telling some wealthy developers how I was the only contractor left in the state who knew how to frame a roof properly. Everything was perfect. Then the heavy custom oak front door swung open. My parents walked in. I watched them from across the room. My mother, Eleanor, was wearing an absurdly expensive designer gown that looked more appropriate for a red carpet gala than a mountain home showcase. My father, Robert, wore a tailored tuxedo jacket. They paused at the entrance, their eyes wide as they took in the sheer scale of the estate. The soaring 30-foot ceilings, the custom chandeliers, the sheer wealth vibrating in the room. Immediately, their posture changed. My father puffed out his chest, completely adjusting his arrogant facade to fit the room. My mother slapped on her most practiced, fake socialite smile. They did not come over to me first. Instead, they immediately started working the room. I watched my mother approach a group of investors I had been talking to earlier. I could hear her sharp, carrying voice over the soft classical music. She pointed a manicured finger toward the vaulted ceiling. "Yes, the timber work is exquisite. Isn't it? My son Elijah built this. We always encouraged his little building projects when he was a boy. We bought him his very first tool set." It took everything in my power not to laugh out loud. The woman who told me my hands were meant for the dirt, the woman who refused to step foot in my first apartment because it was beneath her, was now taking credit for my empire. My father was no better. I saw him cornering a prominent banker near the patio doors. He was holding a glass of champagne, nodding sagely. It takes a strong family foundation to build a business like this. I taught Elijah everything he knows about discipline and hard work. The business acumen runs in the blood. Sarah leaned into my shoulder, her voice low. Look at them. They look like they own the place. Are you going to throw them out? Not yet, I replied quietly, my eyes locked on my father. I want them to feel completely comfortable. I want them to think they have one. For 2 hours, I let them parade around the estate. I let them shake hands, hand out their own business cards, and bask in the glow of my success. They truly believed they had seamlessly slipped right back into my life. They thought the past 2 years of ignoring my existence were erased just because they showed up in nice clothes. Eventually, the crowd began to thin out. The caterers started packing up the silver trays. The sun was setting over the ridge, casting a deep orange glow through the massive windows. My father finally caught my eye across the empty expanse of the great room. He gave me a confident, entitled nod and gestured his head toward the master study down the hall. He wanted a private word. I gave Sarah a knowing look. The moment had finally arrived. The trap was ready to snap shut. I placed my glass on a side table, straightened my jacket, and walked down the long, silent hallway. I pushed open the heavy doors to the master study. My father was already standing behind the massive walnut executive desk, running his hands over the leather surface like he was preparing to buy it. My mother followed closely behind me and shut the door with a soft click. We were completely alone. The grand performance was over. Now it was time for the truth. The master study was soundproof. The moment the door clicked shut, the soft music from the great room completely vanished. My father turned around from the window. He had a smug, self-satisfied grin on his face. He buttoned his jacket and walked around the desk, approaching me like a king greeting a minor lord. Elijah, my father said, his voice dripping with fake warmth. I have to admit you have done exceptionally well for yourself. This property is magnificent. Your mother and I are incredibly impressed. Thank you, I said flatly. My voice was completely devoid of emotion. I did not move a muscle. My mother stepped forward, reaching out to touch my arm. I took a deliberate half-step back, causing her hand to awkwardly drop to her side. She quickly recovered, pasting that sugary smile back on her face. Darling, we know things have been tense between us, she said smoothly. But seeing all of this, seeing the man you have become, we realize it is time to put the past behind us. Family should not hold grudges. We want to be a part of your life again. Is that right? I asked, staring dead into her eyes. Absolutely, my father chimed in, adopting his best corporate negotiation tone. In fact, I have been looking at your company's growth trajectory. You are expanding fast, Elijah. Too fast, perhaps. A business this size needs proper financial structuring. It needs a veteran hand. I am officially offering my services to sit on your board of directors. Think of it as a promotion for the family. With my banking connections and your labor, we can double this company's valuation in a year. We can manage your wealth properly. He actually believed it. He actually thought he could stroll in after years of abuse, slap me on the back, and take control of the money I bled for. He thought I was still that desperate 14-year-old boy begging for a shred of validation. Manage my wealth, I repeated slowly. I let the words hang in the air. Exactly, my father nodded eagerly. You are a builder, son. You do not understand high-level asset protection. Leave the heavy lifting of the finances to me. I reached inside the inner pocket of my suit jacket. I did not pull out a business contract. I pulled out a thick stack of folded, high-resolution printed papers. I had spent hours preparing this specific file. I slowly unfolded the papers and tossed them onto the center of the walnut desk. They landed with a heavy smack. I understand a lot more about finances than you think, Robert, I said, dropping the title of Dad. My father looked down at the papers. His brow furrowed in confusion. He stepped closer to the desk and picked up the top sheet. It was a copy of a bank statement. Not my bank statement. I watched his face carefully. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The smug, arrogant glow completely drained from his cheeks, leaving behind a sickly, pale white. His jaw went slack. His eyes widened as they darted across the numbers on the page. His hands actually began to shake, rattling the crisp paper in the quiet room. Where did you get this?" he stammered. His voice was suddenly thin and breathless. My mother looked at him, completely confused. "Robert, what is it? What are those papers?" "Those papers, Eleanor," I said, my voice rising just enough to cut through the room like a razor blade, "are the exact reason you two put on expensive clothes and came here tonight to play the loving parents. Because you are not here to celebrate my success. You are here to survive your own failure." My father dropped the papers back onto the desk like they were burning his fingers. He took a step back, looking at me with pure, unadulterated terror. The illusion of the rich, powerful suburban banker shattered right there on my expensive hardwood floor. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us. I was taller than him now, and for the first time in my life I looked down at him. 2 years ago, you sat at your formal dining table and handed Wyatt $120,000. I said, my voice echoing off the stone walls. You looked me in the eye and told me you were making an investment. You told me you would not reward failure. You made me believe you had hundreds of thousands of dollars in a college fund and savings, just waiting to be handed out to the son who followed your rules. My mother's breath hitched. She looked at the papers on the desk, finally recognizing the bright red bank logos and the bold, terrifying letters printed at the top of the second page. Notice of default. But that was a lie, wasn't it? I continued, pointing a stiff finger at the documents. There was no massive savings account. There was no inheritance waiting to be unlocked. You wanted so desperately to maintain the image of the wealthy, successful parents funding their Ivy League son in Manhattan that you did the most pathetic thing imaginable. I slammed my hand on the desk, making them both jump. You took out a second mortgage on your own house. I shouted. You leveraged the roof over your own heads to give Wyatt a down payment he could not afford, just so you could brag about his Manhattan zip code to your golf buddies. My father swallowed hard. A single drop of sweat rolled down his temple. He could not speak. And then the reality hit, I said, pacing slightly, feeling the adrenaline surging through my veins. Wyatt's salary could not cover the massive mortgage and the taxes. He went completely broke. He stopped paying you back. And because you are drowning in your own credit card debt to keep up your fake country club lifestyle, you missed the payments on that second mortgage. My mother covered her mouth with both hands. Tears were welling in her eyes. Not tears of remorse, but tears of pure panic and humiliation. She looked like she was attending a funeral, her own financial funeral. I know everything, I said, lowering my voice to a lethal calm. I know the bank sent you a final notice of foreclosure last week. I know you cannot afford a lawyer. I know you are exactly 30 days away from losing the house you prize above everything else. You are completely, utterly bankrupt. The silence in the room was deafening. The mighty Robert, the man who had belittled my intelligence my entire life, was standing there trembling. You saw the magazine, I said, shaking my head in disgust. You saw the pictures of my estate. You realized the son you threw in the trash is now a multimillionaire. So you put on your best suits, crashed my event, and planned to manipulate your way onto my payroll. You wanted to use my hard-earned money to pay off the massive debt you created for the golden child. You came here to beg. My father finally found his voice. It was cracked and pathetic. Elijah, please, you have to understand. We are family. If the bank takes the house, your mother and I will have nowhere to go. We will lose everything. The embarrassment, the social standing. The social standing? I repeated, almost laughing at the sheer insanity of his priorities. You are about to be homeless, and you are worried about your social standing. Please, son, my mother sobbed, reaching out again. You have so much now. This house, this business. Paying off our mortgage would be nothing to you. It is a drop in the bucket. You owe us. We raised you. We put food on your table. You put food on my table because it was legally required to keep the state from taking custody of me. I snapped back. You never gave me a dime when I was eating canned beans and working until my hands bled. You laughed at me. You called my wife a liar. You called me a failure. I picked up the bank statement from the desk, crushed it into a tight ball, and threw it directly at my father's chest. It bounced off his expensive tuxedo jacket and rolled onto the floor. My father fell to his knees. The proud, arrogant banker literally dropped to his knees on my hardwood floor. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and desperate. "I am sorry, Elijah," he begged, his voice cracking violently. "I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong about you. You are brilliant. You are a massive success. Please just write the check. I will do whatever you want. I will apologize publicly. Just do not let the bank take our home. We are your blood." I looked down at him. I searched my heart for a single shred of pity. I looked for the scared little boy inside me who used to crave this exact moment. The moment his father finally acknowledged his worth. But that boy was dead. He died the night they told me I was a failure. In his place was a man forged in steel, sweat, and absolute self-respect. "You are right about one thing," I said quietly, looking down at the top of his graying head. "I could write that check right now. I could pay off your entire house in cash, and I would not even feel it in my bank account." My father looked up, a glimmer of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. "But I won't," I stated. The hope instantly vanished, replaced by sheer horror. "What?" my mother gasped, stepping back against the wall. "You cannot be serious. You are just going to let us be thrown out into the street." "You told me once that you do not reward failure," I said, quoting the exact words he used to destroy me 2 years ago. I made sure my diction was perfectly clear, hammering each syllable into his skull. "You chose to leverage your future on a fake image. You chose to fund an illusion instead of supporting honest, hard work. You chose to make your bed, Robert. Now you get to lie in it." "Elijah, you are being vindictive," my mother shrieked, her face turning an ugly shade of red. "This is cruel." "No, Eleanor," I corrected her firmly. "Cruel is watching your son struggle to buy groceries while you hand out $120,000 to his brother. Cruel is mocking the woman I love. This is not cruelty. This is consequences. Something you have successfully avoided your entire lives." I walked over to the heavy oak doors and pulled them wide open. The hallway outside was empty. "Your performance is over," I commanded, pointing toward the exit. "Get out of my house. Get off my property. And when the bank locks the doors on your precious suburban home next month, do not call me. You are no longer my parents. We are done." My father slowly stood up from the floor. He looked totally hollowed out, aging 10 years in the span of 10 minutes. He did not say another word. He realized the absolute finality in my voice. He grabbed my weeping mother by the arm, and together they shuffled out of the study. I watched them walk down the long hallway, their heads bowed, looking like the absolute failures they truly were. They walked out the front door, into the cold night air, and got into their car. I watched the taillights of their Mercedes disappear down my long, winding driveway for the absolute last time. This is the moment that changes everything, the moment I finally took back control of my life. Thank you so much for your patience and for staying with me until now. You've been amazing. Please give this video a like and comment one below to let me know you've made it this far. Not only does this help more people find this story, but it also lets me know that my experiences truly mean something to someone. Your support is my greatest motivation to keep sharing the rest of this journey. The heavy oak door closed behind them, and the silence in the massive house was absolute. I stood in the hallway for a long time, listening to the quiet ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My heart was pounding steadily against my ribs, but my hands were completely still. I did not feel angry anymore. I did not feel sad. The overwhelming emotion washing over me was a profound, incredible lightness. A massive, toxic weight that I had been carrying on my shoulders for 34 years had just been completely vaporized. I walked out of the study and headed toward the back patio. The night air was crisp and cool. The stars were brilliant over the mountain ridge. Sarah was sitting on the edge of the stone fire pit, nursing a cup of tea. Next to her sat Wyatt. He was wearing a simple pair of jeans and a flannel shirt. He had arrived an hour earlier through the back entrance to avoid the crowd. He looked healthier than he had in years. The dark circles under his eyes were fading, and the frantic, nervous energy of the Wall Street addict was gone. He looked like a normal guy. They both looked up as I stepped onto the patio. "They are gone," I said simply, taking a seat next to my wife. Sarah did not ask any questions. She just reached over, laced her fingers through mine, and rested her head on my shoulder. That simple touch meant more to me than any magazine cover or million-dollar contract. Wyatt stared into the glowing embers of the fire pit. He rubbed the back of his neck, letting out a long, heavy sigh. "I saw them leaving," he said quietly. Dad looked destroyed. "He looked like a man who finally received his bill," I replied. Wyatt nodded slowly. He picked up a stick and poked at the coals. "I feel responsible, Elijah. If I had just been honest with them, if I had just told them I was drowning instead of taking their money to keep up the charade, they would not be losing the house." "Stop," I said firmly, cutting him off. "Do not take their sins onto yourself. You were a victim of their toxic expectations just as much as I was. They created the golden child, Wyatt. You just tried to survive inside the cage they built for you. Their financial ruin is a direct result of their own vanity and arrogance. They chose to mortgage their house, not you." Wyatt looked at me, a genuine look of gratitude washing over his face. "Thank you, man. I mean it, for everything. If you hadn't pulled me out of that car, I do not know if I would even be alive right now. You are my brother," I said. "We build things in this family. Now we are just going to build a better life." We sat there by the fire for another hour, listening to the wood crackle and the crickets in the distance. The storm that had raged through my entire life had finally passed. The air was clear. The foundation was solid. It was finally time to truly live. 1 full year passed since the night at the mountain estate. A year is a long time when the truth finally takes the wheel. True to my word, I never spoke to my parents again. But in a small city, news always travels fast. 30 days after the showcase, the bank formally foreclosed on my parents' pristine suburban home. The house that had been the absolute center of their universe, the ultimate symbol of their fake wealth, was auctioned off to a young tech developer who immediately gutted the interior. The social humiliation completely destroyed them. My father lost his position at the bank shortly after. No financial institution wants a senior manager whose own home is repossessed due to reckless borrowing. My mother was forced to resign from her elite real estate agency because she could no longer maintain the required wealthy client connections. Last I heard, they had moved into a small, outdated 2-bedroom rental apartment on the far industrial side of the city. My mother took a job as a basic receptionist at a dental office. My father was working as a mid-level loan processor for a discount auto dealer. They were finally forced to live the exact working-class life they had spent decades mocking. It was pure, undeniable karma. They tried to reach out to Wyatt, of course. When their world collapsed, they blew up his phone, crying, playing the victims, begging for money, and demanding he help them secure a lawyer to fight the bank. Wyatt did exactly what I taught him. He drove to their new, cramped apartment. He stood in the doorway, looked our father in the eye, and handed him a check for exactly $1,000 to cover their moving expenses. Then Wyatt laid down the absolute law. He told them he was sober, he was working for my company, and he would never again engage in their toxic financial games. He told them to never ask him for money again. He turned around, walked down the cheap carpeted hallway, and never looked back. Wyatt's transformation was the proudest achievement of my life. He spent 3 months in rehab, completely detoxing from the stimulants and the stress of his old life. When he got out, he came to work for Elijah's Custom Construction. I did not put him in a fancy office right away. I made him put on a hard hat, steel-toed boots, and work on the framing crew for 2 months. I wanted him to understand the sweat and blood that went into every dollar we made. He did not complain once. He hauled lumber, drove nails, and learned to respect the craftsman. After he proved his humility, I moved him into the corporate office as my chief financial officer. With his Ivy League education focused entirely on honest accounting instead of Wall Street manipulation, my company became an unstoppable machine. He optimized our supply chains, structured brilliant employee benefit programs, and secured massive commercial credit lines. He was making a fraction of his old salary, but he was completely debt-free, healthy, and sleeping 8 hours a night. He traded a fake Porsche for a reliable Ford truck, and he had never been happier. We were no longer competitors fighting for toxic love. We were a highly lethal business partnership. The greatest victory, however, had nothing to do with money or revenge. It happened on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring. I was sitting at the kitchen island, going over some blueprints, when Sarah walked into the room. She was wearing my old, oversized flannel shirt. She walked up behind me, wrapped her arms around my neck, and placed a small, white plastic stick on the center of the blueprint. I stared at the 2 bright pink lines. My heart stopped beating for a full 3 seconds. I spun around on the bar stool, grabbed her by the waist, and buried my face in her stomach, laughing and crying at the exact same time. We were going to have a baby. We were finally going to start our own family. The news changed the entire energy of the estate. It brought a profound sense of purpose to everything I had built. I was not just building a business anymore. I was building a generational legacy. I was ensuring that my child would never have to worry about a college fund, would never be told they were a failure, and would have the absolute freedom to pursue whatever passion fired up their soul. The custody of our family's future was completely in our hands now. 2 months before the baby was due, Wyatt and I spent a weekend locked inside my personal woodshop. We had the giant bay doors rolled open, letting the cool autumn breeze sweep through the shop. Classic rock was playing on the radio. The smell of freshly cut maple filled the air. We were building the crib. I was teaching Wyatt how to use the wood router to create smooth, perfect edges on the hardwood rails. He was covered in sawdust, wearing safety goggles, completely focused on the task. "You are pushing too hard, Wyatt," I said, leaning over to guide his hands. "Let the bit do the work. If you force it, the wood will burn. Just guide it." Wyatt relaxed his grip, easing the router along the edge of the maple board. Perfect, smooth curve appeared. He turned off the machine, pulled off his goggles, and ran his thumb over the flawless edge. He smiled, a genuine, wide smile that reached all the way to his eyes. "Not bad for a former spreadsheet jockey, right?" He laughed. "Not bad at all," I replied, handing him a sanding block. We worked side by side for hours, cutting, sanding, and assembling the massive, solid maple crib. There was no competition between us. There was no father standing over our shoulders telling us we were doing it wrong. There was just the pure, honest satisfaction of creating something beautiful with our own hands for the next generation. As we fitted the final joint and secured the frame, Wyatt wiped the sweat from his forehead. He looked at the crib, then looked at me. "You know," he said softly, "this kid is going to have the best dad in the world. You are going to break the cycle, Elijah. You already broke it." I looked at the crib, thinking about the child who would soon sleep there. "I am just going to teach him how to build," I said. "The rest is up to him." Today, as I stand on the massive back deck of my estate, looking out over the 5 acres of land I own free and clear, I realize what true wealth actually looks like. When I was a kid, my parents convinced me that success was defined by a shiny suit, a degree on the wall, and the ability to look down on the people who actually built the world. They thought power was sitting in an air-conditioned room, moving imaginary money around. They were so terrified of looking poor that they destroyed their own family, alienated their sons, and ultimately bankrupted themselves just to keep up a miserable illusion. They failed to understand the most fundamental truth of life. You cannot build a mansion on a foundation of sand. True success is not an inheritance you are handed. It is not an Ivy League degree bought with a second mortgage. True success is the calluses on your hands. It is the peace of mind you have when you lay your head on the pillow at night, knowing you did not lie, cheat, or steal to get where you are. It is the absolute, unbreakable loyalty of a partner who stood by you when you were eating canned beans in a freezing apartment. I am a builder. I started with nothing but a hammer and a terrifying amount of desperation. I took the anger, the rejection, and the humiliation, and I used it as fuel to forge an empire made of concrete, steel, and timber. I saved my brother from the toxic machine that almost killed him. I built a fortress to protect my wife and my child. I took control of my own narrative, and I proved that the hands my mother was so ashamed of were capable of building a kingdom. If there is anyone out there right now being told they are a failure because they don't fit into someone else's narrow definition of success, let my story be your blueprint. Let them laugh. Let them call you a failure. Put your head down, do the hard work, build your skills, and let your absolute, undeniable success be the loudest noise you ever make. You have the power to build your own life. Do not ever let anyone else hold the hammer. Thank you for sticking around and listening to my story. I know it was a long journey, but it is the honest truth of how I got to where I am today. I hope this resonated with you in some way, whether you are dealing with a toxic family, trying to build a business from the ground up, or just trying to find your own worth in a world that constantly tries to bring you down. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation? Have you ever had to cut ties with someone toxic just to survive and build your own life? Tell me about it in the comments below. I read as many as I can. Now, for those of you who stayed with me for every single word of this journey, I have a special request. You are part of what I like to call the 1% Club. I want you to go down to the comments right now and type the letter W. W stands for winner. When I see that W, I will know exactly who you are. I will know you are part of the elite group of listeners who have the attention span and the heart to truly connect with a story until the very end. You are the absolute winners. Please don't forget to hit that like button. It takes 1 second, but it pushes this video out so more people who need to hear this message can find it. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so we can continue to share these journeys together. Stay strong, keep building, and I will see you in the next one.